Sessions 1. Creating Strategic Space. Creating strategic space. A strategic narrative is a story that is purposefully created with meaningful elements and intention in order to produce a desired outcome. One does not usually wake up to a sudden revelation that what you wished to do in life is to create strategic space in the lives of others. It more or less grows within you as the interpretation of the reality with which you are most comfortable. By the time I had finished my formal education, that is, completed my PhD dissertation, I had decided to use my training to provide more options in the lives of working people. I have always had a fascination with the idea of creating options within the search for a solution to a problem. As the old saying goes, there is more than one way to skin a cat. Options give people more spaces to perform better in life. I call this providing persons with strategic space. It was soon to become an obsession of mine, creating customized, adaptable life spaces designed and built to solve the challenges of creating wealth in a capitalist environment. One interpretation of my education can be a portrayal of a journey along a road of creating strategic space. The first degree from Miami University in 1968 in the theory of the firm, a second degree, a master's degree in monetary economics, which is closer to writing policy. Then a third and a fourth degree from Cornell University, again in the theory of the firm, but this time a different firm, a labor-managed firm. Along this journey, I was fortunate to team up with Tagifava at that IIE seminar in Michigan State University in Christmas 1965. Then there was the formation of the OI Committee International in 1969, and the first OI Committee Foreign Students Workshops, which I helped organize at Washington University in 1975 and 1977. My personal progress at that time was one example of a person growing in performance level from one strategic space to another. That is what you do in strategic space. You grow and increase your productivity and, as a consequence, your capacity to create wealth. I had maintained an interest in the theory of the firm and started to work on helping people develop through their own enterprises. The first opportunity of creating wealth in capitalism is in enterprise. Whether you become a worker in a firm, or are self-employed, or you control the firm with other employees. The labor-managed enterprise. I graduated from Cornell University in the era of the Cold War, when neither the theory of the centralized economy nor free market capitalism could make the claim of ensuring full employment of the workforce. Professor Jaroslav Vaniek captured this phenomenon in his book entitled The General Theory of Labor-Managed Market Economies. Being a Yugoslav, he obviously respected the policies of the then dictator Marshal Tito. I think the affinity came from Tito's independence from Stalin's Russian centralized economy, and from his attempt to build an economy of enterprises run by workers. Vaniek's work was important because it presented a comprehensive theory in support of an economic system different from both capitalism and centrally planned socialism. He had centered his new theory on how a labor-managed enterprise would function, seeking out its own profit levels, worker compensation, and disposition of capital. The attraction of the labor-managed enterprise was not that it employed someone, but rather that it ensured that person continuous employment for as long as he was willing to participate in the productive economy. This was an enterprise in which the worker could not be fired. You could sense that dread feeling of being fired from your job becoming a thing of the past. This worker may leave voluntarily for employment in a more lucrative enterprise, but even in his new workplace, he would become a co-manager of that enterprise. In the beginning of my second year of graduate work, 1971-72, I had become a full disciple of labor-managed enterprise theory. I believed that this theoretical position equipped me to play a meaningful role in the Caribbean. It wasn't going to be political service for me. I found no attraction in the manipulative and partially deceitful role of Dr. Politics. I felt comfortable that I had acquired the necessary skills to create instruments for supporting people in enterprises on 4 counts. A. Training in economics, both formal and what I had learned informally. B. Experience through engagement in the OI Committee International. C. Respect for history and culture as major determinants. D. A desire to share interpretive knowledge and information about the enterprise formation and the creation of wealth. The struggle to reform plantation enterprise. The struggle to reform enterprise was a clear-shot deal when it came to agricultural production. At one end, we had the small farmer who could be as efficient as he needs to be in his production, but would still falter because his land base was too small or his resources for investment in farm equipment and technology were too low. At the other end, we had the estate worker who had no claims on the means of production and was at the mercy of the landowner to remain gainfully employed. Here was the logic. If you can continue to create wealth in whatever enterprise you are engaged, you can increase your cash balances, trade in the open market, and afford the necessities of a decent standard of living. This was not rocket science. The labor-managed enterprise made this feasible in its most basic foundation principles. Professor Vaniak really described his theory as having 5 principles and 1 purpose. The 5 principles were as follows. Labor control, a term used in a way that was different from the term worker, which was a classification of employment status. Labor was used in the sense to include every human person working in the enterprise. Income sharing by all members of the enterprise. Income meant the value of the sales minus all costs, including material costs, capital costs, and taxes. This included a return to capital, but not the entire residual after all explicit costs were met, as is evidenced in the capital-controlled system. Here, the profits were appropriated by labor, not by the shareholders of capital. Decentralized decision-making and full reliance on the market mechanism. This principle meant that no individual can exert any decisive influence that excluded the total workforce. The firm did not favor personal, corporate, bureaucratic corruption. Usufructus rights. Members enjoyed the returns from the use of the assets, but not from the ownership of the same. Freedom of employment. Persons were still free to change their employment if another opportunity was available. The single purpose of the enterprise was to maximize the net income per labor unit. Having learned in Miami University how economic thought grew out of protecting your own class interests, Malthus versus Ricardo, I was now equipped to design enterprises in a manner that applied a different economic thinking to the distribution of income. If you are still listening to this aid memoir, you would by now be familiar with my obsession with Latin. As I said before, I would have considered seriously becoming a Roman Catholic priest simply for the opportunity to speak Latin. Sadly, the Pope lost me when he cancelled that feature and allowed the Mass to be said in the language of the people. The concept of usufructus rights received extraordinary attention. Usus was Latin for use, a right to use or enjoy a thing possessed directly and without altering it. Fructus was Latin for fruit. In a figurative sense, this was the right to enjoy profit from the fruit of one's labor as against the ownership of one's assets. This was the total antithesis of the slave system, in which the slave master enjoyed the fruits of others' labor because he could successfully classify them as his assets. Usufructus rights? I got it right away. Is this a production cooperative? Cooperation in production is nothing new in the Caribbean. Historically, we have seen different forms of such cooperation, such as the Susu in Trinidad. This is a system in which a group of workers would come together to support an individual in accomplishing a task that may be beyond his individual capacity. This system involved no transfer of assets. Indeed, the operating asset here was the manual labor of the participating parties, and this was very easy to manage. Creating producer cooperatives has also been seen as successful in such matters as collective marketing or even bulk wholesale purchasing of inputs in order to take advantage of quantity discounts. This, however, was cooperation among producers and must remain distinguishable from cooperation in production. One of the first hurdles of production cooperatives is that they often confine themselves to the sum total of the assets that they individually brought into the enterprise. This is the famous tale of the undercapitalization of such enterprises. This has some hidden factors. Not only was the startup base too small and more often still connected to the original owner, but there was also the puzzle of who will be able to claim the expansion of the enterprise when the capital base is increased. Applying labor-managed theory to estate production was quite a different matter. As the opportunity presented itself, I was not going to miss this real-life effort to reorganize an estate run by the workers, even though legally it would be incorporated as a cooperative. I was most anxious to lend some assistance. The estate plantation system as existed in the Caribbean was not historically designed to be run like this. Estate workers were hired hands who still had to use their time off to tend their own private plots of land to supplement their low income. In fact, in one of the early estate riots in Dominica at Grand Bay, one of the main complaints was that the estate owner was not allowing workers enough time to tend to their own crops. This reorganization was different. It required that the original land base be vested in the group so that they do not necessarily have to provide their own lands for inclusion in the new enterprise. Here was a production system that would vest them in control of the large acreages of the estate as a collective group, while still maintaining their own private means of creating wealth from enterprising ventures. So where does that place me as an outsider in this process? If you are an astute student of world history, you will recognize the role played by the missionaries in building, consolidating, and imposing the will of the empire. This is not only the religious missionaries, but also those agents in overseas territories who had a single mission, which was to serve the empire. Count in this group the plantation organizers and the trade missionaries whose commerce conquered India, the East India Company, before the imperial Raj could establish itself. What the empire provided all of these persons was a space of refuge. The colonizers and their contributors all knew that they could retreat to a common refuge in the event that the native forces would seek to overpower them. In my mind, we were on the cusp of a new history in the making. The mission challenge to my generation is to create spaces for strategizing, using the very institutions that exist to liberate, so to speak, the energies of a people to do better for themselves. At the individual enterprise level, the strategy against underdevelopment is really a strategy to reverse the level of underperformance of our workers and farmers in their economic, social, and cultural endeavors. End of part 1.